It is 8 o'clock, and we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to the ABIN monthly webinar. We're so glad you're here with us this cool December morning. I do want to remind everyone that by staying on today's call, you're giving us permission to be recorded, and this recording will be replaced on the ABIN webinar, the ABIN website along with slides. So you'll be able to access that information. You'll be able to share that information. However, you will be recorded and you'll be posted to the website. Just wanted to let you know a couple of important things. The first thing is we do have our annual conference date of April 16th confirmed. So please mark your calendars, save the date. April 16th in Little Rock, we'll be having the ABIN annual conference. And then in January, we will be having Dr. Jen Thomas, who is a primary care provider who has been working in the collaborative care model space for several years and instrumental in bringing collaborative care to her primary care clinic. She's also been instrumental in bringing collaborative care to treat people struggling with substance misuse. So please know that is coming. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Casey Copeland. We have had the pleasure of working with Casey really the past 5.5 years. Casey's one of the first people who warmly welcomed ABIN. And so we're grateful to Casey and grateful to all the work that he's doing. So now I'm going to formally introduce you to Casey and tell you about all the amazing things that he's doing. Casey is currently the Director of Recovery Services for the state of Arkansas and a peer recovery peer, peer support peer supervisor. Living in a long-term recovery from substance use disorder since 2017, Casey began his path as a peer support specialist known for his genuine empathy and knack for connecting with people battling substance use and mental health challenges. His first year of recovery was dedicated to volunteering with various organizations in Central Arkansas. Once he achieved abstinence from substances, Casey met and married his wonderful wife, Megan, and in 2020, they celebrated the birth of their daughter, Adeline. Deeply committed to his family, Casey gives all the credit for his achievements to God and stays focused on his recovery by actively participating in a recovery program. When he's not working, Casey loves spending quality time with his family and friends, working out, and enjoying the great outdoors. He's also a deacon at his church, which brings him great joy. Casey has worn many hats over the years, including Director of Peers Achieving Recovery Together, which is where we met you, Casey, Director of Rock of Hope Transitional Houses, co-founder and president of the Copeland Foundation, and chairman of the Arkansas Peer Advisory Committee. Now, as the Director of Peer Services for the state of Arkansas, Casey has played a key role in creating, managing, and rolling out numerous programs statewide. His efforts have made a big splash in improving substance use and mental health in Arkansas, championing inclusivity and empowering people on their own recovery journeys. And as I said, we can't speak highly enough of Casey. He has truly been an amazing, inspirational role model, and I've learned so much from you. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Casey and hear from him.
Thank you so much, Kim. Again, I'm excited to be here. I hope everybody is staying warm and getting ready for Christmas. Thank you, Kim and Jenny, for inviting us to come share about peer support, which is something that's near and dear to us here. I want to mention that I also have brought one of my team members from the recovery unit. Her name is Amanda Vardaman. She is my data coordinator. Amanda, would you like to explain what you do for the recovery unit?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Amanda Vardaman. I am the program manager for the specialty court and the NADAC credentialing subgrants, as well as the data coordinator for DHS for our state opioid response grant.
Thank you. All right, so let me share my screen and we'll get into the slides here. Where are we at? Right here. Okay, can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so session overview. We're going to talk about foundations for hiring a peer, recruiting high quality peers, defining clear roles and boundaries, peer to peer supervision models, and building sustainable teams. And this is directly in line with what we've been getting the most calls about lately. So, this is a perfect topic. Why this topic matters. Of course, there's a growing demand for peer recovery specialists. Stronger peer teams improve outcomes across service settings. Employers face challenges with clarity, support, and integration.
And today there are more practical evidence-based strategies for peers to utilize them that they have been trained on.
Let's talk about the role of a peer recovery specialist. Role clarity improves retention. And what I mean by that is there's peer support is still relatively new in Arkansas. We have done a lot of great work, but there's peers that get hired that go into these roles and they don't know what they're doing. They're fresh out of training, and the agency is not quite sure how to utilize them. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it sends this peer going home a lot trying to figure out if this is meant for them, if this is a good choice for them, and they eventually fall off. Complementing and not duplicating clinical roles. I've seen a lot of peers in a treatment setting start to drift toward a clinical role because that's what they're exposed to a lot. And this also sometimes creates some co-opting within the field. And I don't think it's intentional as much as it's just they're trying to learn how to utilize a peer. The core functions and competencies. We're going to talk about that. I think it's extremely important for a peer to know what SAMHSA's core competencies are, but I also think it's important for an employer to understand what their role is. And then, of course, values that guide peer support. So this is straight from SAMHSA's core competencies. It's recovery-oriented, person-centered, voluntary, relationship-focused, and trauma-informed. And what I mean by recovery-oriented is recovery is paramount to what we do. Getting people to treatment and detox and IDs and birth certificates, social security cards, and safe place to live, and all that's important. But if they don't have recovery, whether it's from mental health, substance use disorder, or if you have co-occurring issues, you got to find a recovery pathway. Mm-hmm. And a recovery pathway, it's not a one size fits all. And it is definitely not an event such as I'm going to go get the oil change in my truck and then I'm going to be good. It is a lifelong process. Yeah. And a good, strong peer is not ever speaking about themselves very often. They're doing more listening, and they're not pushing their own recovery on someone. And this is why we are so adamant about introducing multiple pathways to recovery, because it needs to be the decision of the individual we're working with to choose what pathway is best for them. Person-centered is very simply put, it is just we are working with that person to support their needs and support their goals that they're making for themselves. A huge component of what we do is the voluntary side of things. I have seen people that are caught in the justice system that do things specifically to check boxes. When I worked for a recovery community organization, you came in there and seen me because you wanted to get services. You needed support. It was never because you were forced to do it. And the voluntary side of things means that I'm working at your pace. We're doing what you feel is best for your life. Now, there are some instances that maybe you're in a jail setting and you want to apply to get into maybe a PAC program, or you voluntarily submitted to participating in a specialty court. Then they might, as part of your voluntary commitment to that, they might say, okay, now that you're in this program, you must complete it. But it was still voluntary for you to enter into these programs.
Relationship focused builds on our instant rapport or connection that we have with individuals as peers. We've gone through that lived experience, and that is like basically an instant trust builder, which allows the relationship between a peer and a peer specialist to be relationship focused and not progress focused or recovery focused or whatever it is. And trauma informed just means that we recognize that individuals have gone through trauma and act according so that we do not further traumatize an individual and promote healing.
Yeah, we're definitely not trying to work people through trauma that is clearly outside of our scope, and we would leave that up to the professionals, maybe through a bridge building situation, to make a referral to somebody that could support them through those issues. So I presented at a Police and Peer conference, and I put this slide in there, and I think it was titled "Peer First, Professional Always." And I just want to share this slide in here as well, because it's very important to know that everybody that qualifies or is eligible to go through our training does not mean that they're going to be a good peer support specialist. Everybody that is a peer support specialist that applies to become a supervisor does not mean that they're going to be a good supervisor. And so relatability is not the same as responsibility. Yes, you may have been through it. Yes, you may understand the pain. Yes, your story might inspire someone else. But it says here, peer support is much more than sharing your truth. It's knowing when to listen and when to lead. It's setting boundaries, holding space, and navigating systems. It's knowing your scope, staying within it all that, and respecting it. It's supporting without projecting, and it's helping without harming. Lived experience is the foundation of what we do, and readiness turns into professional peer work.
So now that we know that everyone's not going to be a great fit, we need to find out, how do we find the right fit? So recruiting the ideal peer consists of competencies that predict success. What we mean by competencies is a peer needs to have competent skills in an area that is relevant to the field that they're working in. So like me, for example, I need to have communication skills, writing skills, data analyst skills. I need to have professionalism, right? So those are the competent skills that I possess to do my job at DHS. Aligning lived experience to role needs would be, for example, if your justice involvement in the past would qualify you to work in a justice involved setting, like in a jail or in a specialty court. Or same for treatment, right? Have you been through that experience that allows you to better do your job as a peer within that role? Effective interview questions. This is for employers. It's important to know, I think, the basis of core competencies for peer specialists when interviewing a peer worker so that you can listen for the right answers. When you're asking a question about core competencies of peer services, you want to know that the person you're interviewing is or is not aware of what they should be doing. And some common red flags in hiring mistakes to look for are, is this person an active peer worker within the state of Arkansas? And we'll show you how to find that. Have they just gotten a certificate and let it expire? Are they actively pursuing their credential? Are they professional? Do they have the communication skills and technical skills necessary to do the job that you're presenting?
Yeah, and we've seen this a lot. We've seen people that have, you'll receive a certificate after you've gone through the training that says I've completed 30 hours of core training. But the next step is being paired with a supervisor. And then that's when you receive a PIT letter and you really start working towards your certification. So you want to make sure that these people actually have a PIT letter and that they're actually actively in the middle of pursuing your credential, or they've tested in their credential and they're maintaining their credential. And we have a website that we keep updated for that. So you can go in and check the peer directory and it will show what status they're at. I love maps. We wanted to include these so you guys could kind of see some of our funded programs, but more so you could see areas that there's not programs. Again, you can find these on arpeers.org. We have made a lot of headway with the recovery unit. Of course, there's still a lot of gaps, a lot of deserts in Arkansas. I always say that some of those places probably it's not a good area to have a Kim Free House if there's not jobs in the area. But, those people need to know how to access peer services. And so we have done a really good job looking at this next map. You can see that our goal always was to put at least one peer in all 75 counties, which we've done that except for in Lincoln and Fulton County, I think, and Lafayette. But of course, we have enough peers in the surrounding counties to serve and the capacity of the counties that don't have peers. That totals about 415 peers throughout Arkansas that we currently have. That's either a peer training, pursuing credentialing, or they are in an advanced level of credentialing. I found this also before I presented at that last conference, and I wanted to share this. This is how big the peer workforce has gotten. There's over 100,000 certified peer specialists nationwide. That includes 49 states plus the District of Columbia. That has statewide certification programs as of 2024, so I'm sure these numbers have increased. Uh, it shows that we've surpassed psychologists as the third largest workforce in mental health and substance use. And the number I just gave you, Arkansas currently has 415 peer specialists covering all three credentialing levels.
So what are we looking for when we're hiring beyond lived experience in finding the right peer for the job? Availability. So first, stability, right? Do they have boundaries? When to me to look out for is maybe trauma dumping during an interview. That's a great indication that someone doesn't have great boundaries in their recovery. There's another part where we're talking about those skills needed, communication or other skills. Professionalism. Do they speak professionally? Do they show up to their interview looking professional? And the last thing is a healthy recovery pathway. So what we don't require is a certain recovery pathway or a certain one of any of these recovery pathways in peer recovery. But what is evident is when someone is not participating in a healthy recovery pathway based on the way that they act in and out of work. So that's going to be evident if employers keep their eyes open and look for that, because we are taught in recovery to act with morals and values, participate as a member of society, all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Again, when we are vetting when our certification body is vetting applications, they're going over the questions and how you answer them, but we're not calling and verifying that you have a sponsor or anything along that line. But it will come to surface pretty quick when you don't have a strong recovery program, or when you're not maintaining a strong recovery program, which is the first sentence in our ethics is maintaining your recovery. So clear job description. I've always worked under grants, and I remember when I first went to work under a grant, it was it was the first jail program in the state of Arkansas. Y'all know it as the PAC program in Lone Oak. And we were so new. I think it was, I was working over there, and Bonnie Stribling was working at DYS, and that was like the two state funded peer programs. So we were brand new in the state as peers. I was fresh out of training, making a lot of the mistakes that we're discussing today. But things change so often. I knew from that moment forward that if I was going to be paid under grant, I wanted to look at what the grant was, what the scope of work was, what the deliverables were, so I could make sure that I was meeting all of those needs. So clarifying expectations early on is important. Of course, you want to base it off Samson's core competencies. And we are always available Monday through Friday up here as a recovery unit for you guys to reach out to. We want to train employers on how to utilize peers, as well as we are focused on always improving our program, because we are so confident that peer work is effective. We see the numbers, and we want it to continue to get better and better. And the clearer the expectations are, the better the results will obviously be.
We also have written job descriptions that we have sent to ABIN for distribution, which probably can be added to the online webinar. But if it would probably be a good idea to take those written job descriptions provided by DHS and kind of mix them with agency specific.
Then at the bottom there, you'll see arpeers.org. Amanda is amazing. She has so many talents, and one of her great talents is maintaining our website. Everything that we discuss, everything that is relatable to the peer profession, you can find on arpeers.org. And we encourage everybody to utilize that. So when a peer goes through training and they receive a PIT letter, we put them in our directory. You can search by name, you can search by county. When they test, we get monthly reports from NADAC, our credentialing body. So we go in there and we change it from PIT to a certified peer. If they go to advanced, they become advanced trained. We're always keeping this website updated from anything peer related all the way down to resources. So red flags in recruiting. Some of those mistakes I told you guys I made early on, these are some of them. The savior mentality. We find recovery. We're trained. We're working toward a credential. We're so excited that we have a purpose for our past that we are going to go save the world.
The whole world.
The whole world. And then you have a wife like mine that says, no, you're not going to talk on the phone at 8 o'clock at night. You're going to spend time with your family. Then you learn that you can't fix people. So then you go back to the manual and you start using the evidence-based practices you're taught, and then you start to make headway. I think it comes from a reactive to a proactive mindset. When someone calls and tells you they need treatment, instead of firing all 5 resources, you start talking to them about why they think they need treatment.
Yeah.
But the savior mentality, that will lead to burnout. It'll lead to boundary issues. It'll lead to ethical violations. You need to do what you're taught, and listen and supervision to really hone the skills very early in recovery. When peer services first began back in 2017, they really didn't get really geared up until 2019, but the eligibility requirements was 1 year back then of complete abstinence, and we were just seeing a tremendous amount of failure, and that's so we increased it to 2 years. And this year I'm coming up on 8 years this month, and looking back at 2 years, I remember not knowing a whole lot. So that's still considered very early in recovery, where you're kind of on what they call the pink cloud, where it is that life is great, everything's great, and that can also lead to some boundary issues pretty quick. So when we go directly into boundary issues and it's blurring the professional lines, this is me maybe asking a peer that I'm serving if they want to go see a movie or go out to dinner or come over to a barbecue at my house. Those boundary issues will always eventually lead to an ethical situation. So you want to have strong boundaries. It's important that people know that you have strong boundaries too. It will really help the professional relationship when you're providing services. You don't want to paint this picture that you can call me anytime for anything and I'm available.
An understanding of the peer role is also important for employers to have, again, because you're looking for the person that you're interviewing to have an understanding of that peer role. If an employer or an interviewer doesn't have an understanding, they won't know that the person they're interviewing doesn't have that understanding, because it'll sound great. And last but not least, a red flag in recruiting is employers hiring too quickly out of need. We have learned from experience here at DHS and have now written into our agreements that our employees, that our peers, have to be replaced within 60 days. So, for example, using that timeline, that sometimes puts a little bit of a crunch on hiring the right individual. And we have seen that, go a number of ways, good and bad. So just be aware of hiring too quickly out of need and not taking the time to look for the right individual for your organization.
We've got 415 peers, like we said, in the state. We got 2 more core trainings. So we're going to increase probably between 60 and 90 more individuals this year. So there's always going to be a lot of peers to hire from. Okay, so let's talk about peer supervision. We felt like early on that it was important that peers train peers and peers supervise peers. A lot of states are just now adopting this. Our national credentialing body is going to take our advanced and our supervisor model nationally. I always tell people we were kind of late to the game on getting started with peer services in Arkansas, but since then we've gotten ahead of people, and now we've got them reaching out to us, asking us what we're doing. We're still working on tweaking this, but what is peer supervision? Let's talk about why peers need peer-specific supervision, key elements of quality peer supervision, and then a big question we always have is co-supervision models balancing accountability with peer values. And I am going to let Amanda give you the definition and also explain what the co-supervision looks like.
Okay, so what is peer supervision? This is defined by SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, one of our most important federal partners here at DHS. Supervision is a professional and collaborative activity between a supervisor and a worker in which the supervisor provides guidance and support to the worker to promote competent and ethical delivery of services and supports through the continuing development of the worker's application of accepted professional peer work knowledge, skills, and values. So, when in Arkansas, we abide by a co supervision model, which means that, and I'm going to use, if any of you know Casey's wife Megan, I'm going to use her for an example here today. Hopefully, that's okay. Hopefully, she's not on the call. I don't know.
If it's not, she'll let me know the second.
So, Megan, if you know her, uses the co-supervision model. Her peer supervisor is Sean McCowan. He is responsible for guiding her all the way up through the credentialing process. At first, you're trained, you're overloaded. You have to figure out what peer supervision is, how to provide peer services ethically, and then all the way up through however far you want to go. Now, Megan is a supervisor in training, and her supervisor is responsible for guiding her on how to supervise peers in recovery, right? And then separately, she has her boss at ABIN, Kim Schuler, right, who is responsible for guiding her everyday activities, evaluating her at work, giving her job reviews, right? So Sean McCowan, her peer supervisor, is in charge of her credentialing and guiding her in how to deliver services, as opposed to her boss at ABIN, Kim Schuler, who has nothing to do with her credential, right? Sean would never write Megan up or terminate her or anything like that because it's a separate credential versus job situation.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, so we get this question a lot. Some of our programs we have built-in peer supervisors that are on staff, but even still, they may or may not be handing out corrective action or consequences. That might still be coming from an executive director, but a peer supervisor is more like mentoring you through this process. Uh, there's a lot of challenges a peer supervisor has. We've been on a lot of this retraining, retraining the manuals to the peers, trying to get them comfortable providing services, as well as just going over real life scenarios like what does it look like to get somebody into treatment? What's faith based look like versus state funded treatment, and how do you get people insurance or whatever the scenario may be. But it's more of like a mentoring, a supportive role more so than an authoritative role.
So, what are the dangers to not having a peer supervisor for a peer credential?
So supervisors may lack experience and working knowledge of peer practices. We see that. Supervisors may have a clinical approach to service delivery, which is the opposite of what a peer is.
Because they're a clinician or it's a clinical setting,
Correct.
they have almost no choice.
And then organizations may not be aligned with recovery-oriented values, practices, and culture. We have a session in our core model that talks about the shift to recovery. It starts in the 80s and comes to present and kind of goes through the different transitions of how substance use disorder as well as mental health issues are addressed these days. But we call ourselves change agents, and that where we kind of come in, we want to talk to you about changing some of the terminology because words matter and language matters, as well as bringing some recovery oriented uh, information into the system. Did I hit everything on that one?
One more.
Oh, challenges in integrating peer workers and recovery values in a treatment setting. Again, that's the same thing of what I talked about just, things have been done a certain way for a long time. And now that we've got peers in the recovery as a profession and as a unit, it's important that we start to bring what we're learning into the system.
Okay, so the three elements, according to SAMHSA, of peer supervision are administrative, educative, and supportive. So, administrative peer support or peer supervision looks like teaching peers how to operate the systems that we use, making sure they know how to add recurring calendar invitations on their calendar, things like that. Educative would be our ensuring of professional development and continued education, reviewing curriculum when needed, and things like that. And then supportive kind of has a little bit more to do with peer workers' morale. So, for example, a lot of times when a peer is hired in a setting that doesn't have other peers working within it, like a specialty court peer working by themselves versus a peer working at an RCO that has a bunch, they tend to think that they're not doing a good job because they don't have anyone around them watching them, right? So in this role, the supportive role, a peer supervisor's job is to one, make sure they are doing a good job, right? And two, support their morale and ensure job proficiency.
That's great. One of the several challenges that a supervisor has is like we've got this massive model, this three-tier credential. So that means that a peer supervisor, they're going to have to know all three of those manuals, including your core and advanced level ethics, our national ethics, and then our supervisor ethics, as well as, how to explain real life scenarios, talk people off the ledge. Uh, you know, the retraining part is something that we have had a major focus on, and I've been trying to really get away from that. And I'm going to tell you why. People, our pass rate was 73% for a long time. Now it's at 82%. We got people passing the test, but testing is not that's not the difficult part of being a peer specialist. It's learning how to provide services effectively and adequately based off the evidence-based practices you're taught on all three levels. What we decided to do is create a committee to standardize the way supervision's done. I thought it was important for us to do this. I think the supervisors are craving some type of direction and leadership over this. So as of yesterday, we've had outlines sent in, and we're going to look at standardizing this process. And then if we're having issues, we'll be able to adjust one time or two times or three times, and it will adjust all the way across the profession.
We're excited about that.
Building a sustainable peer team. This is, I hear this a lot, not just from people that, the state funds, but also a lot of programs that AORP funds. And, it's just so new. It's so new on both sides. And, a lot of the challenges we face, I hear law enforcement faces with their law enforcement officers. And so we want to get people trained to work with both the peer and the organization or agency so they can hit the ground running right out of the gate. So creating a culture that values peer voices. I've heard us called a lot of things. There's a lot of stigma that comes with this profession. We're aware of it. We address it every time we have the opportunity. But we hear a lot of the time, these are people that have high school diplomas or GEDs that got into this field, and we've been called rogue. We've been called a lot of things. But what I think that is important is that we put a value on the lived experience that we bring. That lived experience, it's hard to teach that out of a book. And so I think it's important that if you're going to have a peer integrated into the team, that we have a collaborative approach with it and allow them to use their voice.
And one of the reasons that's so important is, like, for me, for example, I have so much experience in recovery and before recovery, obviously, but like I can almost predict how an individual is thinking or wanting to manipulate, or maybe even the next thing that's going to come out of their mouth because I have been there, So it is a valuable piece of the team, I think, when putting it all together with the agency they're working within.
Yeah, and we definitely believe in a collaborative approach. I don't think that you can have enough tools in a toolbox, especially when we're working with people's lives. And so we welcome everyone to join in the team with the peers, because if we've worked with someone long enough, inevitably they will exceed our scope, and there needs to be a transition to a professional that can help with the rest. Career pathways and development. I think it's important for when someone hires a peer to allow them time to come to ethics trainings, to come to professional development, come to conferences, just to have that opportunity if they want to level up in their credentialing, because every time they go through training, they're going to have more knowledge on what it looks like to be a peer, not just on the front line, but administratively. And so the other thing is peers, we do have to reel them in. Sometimes it's a PIT level, sometimes core level issue, as these peers try to do too much, and we have to tell them you need to work during your hours. You need to take breaks when you're supposed to, and this in turn will prevent burnout.
Right.
If you're trying to save the world, this I have this saying that the profession will teach you, and you know you, that this falls under again a boundary issue where you're trying to work too closely with somebody or you're trying to get out too far ahead of them, and it will burn you out, and eventually you'll start looking for another job.
And for the last one, using feedback and data for improvement, like we need to work on clearing up the role confusion, like making clear documentation practices so that before we move forward, which we'll talk about in our next slide, everything is very clear for both the employer and the person employed.
Okay, so organizational readiness. Let's look here. Do you understand the peer practice? Do you know how to integrate into multidisciplinary teams? Do you know how to integrate a peer into that? Proper supervision structures. I think that's talking to, group supervision is done by Zoom weekly. Supervisors usually run 2 to 5 a week. There's a lot of opportunity to get into supervision. There's supervisor also takes one-on-one time to spend with the peer that needs direct services, I guess, from supervisor. And then when we go into addressing barriers before expanding, we get people that hire peers. They start saying, "This is what we love to hear." By the way, I don't know how we ever lived without peers. Now we want to expand and hire more peers. So, Amanda, you want to talk about addressing the barriers before
Well, one,
expansion?
yeah, one of the biggest mistakes organizations make when expanding peer services before they're ready. Growth sounds really good on paper when you start reaping the benefits of peer services being provided within your agency. But if the foundational issues aren't addressed, like role clarity, lack of training, weak documentation systems, unclear expectations, all of those programs or problems are going to grow with the agency and with the expansion as it happens.
That brings us to the end of our presentation here. The key takeaways we put was a clear roadmap for hiring and supervising peers, practical tools employers can implement immediately, awareness of the common pitfalls, and strategies for building sustainable teams. So I haven't seen any hands go up yet, but that brings us to our questions section. So we're going to stop sharing for a second and see.
Absolutely. Let's see if we have any questions. Um, Anybody? Please feel free to put questions in the chat, come off mute, raise your hand, or however you'd like to do this. We're a friendly, interactive group.
Kim, it could be that we were just that thorough. I don't know.
You guys were. You really hit on lots of different components. Um, One question for me, just kind of thinking about um, integrated care and team-based care. Oh, we do have a question. All right. Rodney, um, please don't hesitate to come off mute and ask a question or.
Okay, good. I really appreciate the way that you guys explained all of that. Kind of a two-part question because Amanda, you had pointed out in the very beginning that when an individual starts to kind of remove themselves from their own personal recovery, you
Mhm.
know, what is a good way to address that person, especially for maybe an employee or an employer who isn't in recovery? I could see how that would be a very difficult conversation to have as well as, and then part two, with self-care being the number one aspect of a peer specialist ethics, how can an employer help them with that? What are some things they can do to Because I see a lot of peers, to me, that's the hardest ethic for me to do,
Mm.
because it's hard to not have that save the world mentality. It's hard to not sacrifice yourself sometimes for another individual. So how can an employer help a peer specialist with their own self-care program?
It's a great question, Ronnie. I think that, of course, like for somebody like us that's in recovery, I think we could spot it and have that conversation
Mhm.
and it not be as uncomfortable as it might be for somebody that's not in recovery. I think that as an employer that's not in recovery, I think that you'll start to see signs of kind of you get this attitude of, that certain person calls you, oh my God, I can't believe they're calling. I don't want to have to take this call.
Right.
Um,
Behavior
yeah,
changes.
and then, they could either, talk to them just about the changes and kind of say, what is the process for you when you're feeling like this? And hopefully they're going to get a response of, well, I can call my sponsor, I can even call my supervisor. I think it is important, for an employer also to know the ethics of a peer to make sure that they are following them because we just get wore out. We get wore out, and then if you're in recovery or even a gym rat like me, it's like the days that you don't want to go. Those are the most important days that you need to go. You got to make time for these things because that is what's gotten you where you're at, and you got to stay with it.
Well, and same for part two of your question. I think like if you address a change in behavior with an employee and they come back with they haven't been maintaining self-care or boundaries or whatever it is, like I would suggest to give them the allowance to use the tools that they need to remedy that. Like for me, as an example, I am a severe introvert. So if I don't have enough alone time, you know what I mean? Like I am allowed every once in a while to take a little sick day and isolate for a minute. You know what I mean? Because that is what gets me back to neutral, right? So whatever that is, but it's obviously not the employer's responsibility to make sure that a peer worker is maintaining their recovery or their self care, right? But maybe being more open minded to a solution once the problem has been identified by both the employer and the peer worker, being more open to whatever solution is brought forward.
Yeah, there's always a solution, Rodney. There always is. But that's why we say you should stay on top of your recovery. Like my week, the way I plan my days out, I'm staying on top of my recovery if things are good or bad. You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
but but again, this profession has taught me to do that, so I can be prepared for these hard days because they come. You're working with people. You're hearing horrible, horrible things that's happened to people that got them in the middle of addiction. I mean, it's a tough conversation. You hear a lot, and then sometimes if you're not deeply rooted in recovery and stuff, it could start triggering things from your past. You know what I mean? And that's why we have that out there. There's days even up here at our office that sometimes we'll spend our lunch break, we'll go catch a meeting. And a step further from that, I've worked with several people that are no longer with us, and that will really start to play on your psyche. You'll start to question everything you're doing, and did I do enough? Was there more I could have done? I've had these conversations, but luckily, during that time, I had a group of people that were a lot smarter than me, brought me in a room and basically told me I didn't have that kind of power to save
Mhm.
somebody's life, which was a hard pill to swallow, and it's still never easy to deal with. But you got to stay on top of your recovery, notice the change in behavior, and address it early on. That would be my suggestion. Did that answer your question, Rodney?
Yes, very good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rodney.
I guess for me, as I'm hearing that, um, I'm hearing it's so important to take care of yourself, to be aware, to make sure self-care is part of every day, part of your recovery, because these are really hard jobs. Any tips for employers to that could help them think about how can an employer be the most supportive when they're bringing a peer on and should an employer talk to someone about let's make a plan so you're getting the self-care you need? Any suggestions for those thoughts?
Again, I think, knowing our ethics, Kim, and having those conversations, it says, keeping your personal recovery first. So hiring you on over here as an employee, I want to make sure that we're allowing time for this, and that we're aware of this. And I want you to feel comfortable being able to come talk to me when things are getting tough, and be transparent and have that kind of communication.
And maybe don't let them work 20 hours of overtime every week so that they are saving the world.
Yeah.
Maybe say no to that.
Well, Kim, that's a great question because it is, like I said, we've been doing this for a while, but I still consider the profession to be relatively new, especially in Arkansas. And so I appreciate the people that are hiring peers and working on integrating them into the team. And I think that it will be, you'll look back on it and say, I made a good decision to do this because we are effective and we bring a lot to the table, but collaboratively,
Mhm.
we're real good. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
As a team. But I think, for social workers and everybody, self-care is important. You know what I mean? I think it's always
Absolutely.
important to take care of yourself, especially working in the behavioral health field.
I hear that and totally agree with you all. All right. Let's see. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. Um, Holly, please come off mute, ask your question. We'll give you a couple of seconds. And if not, Holly, please get ready for your question. And we have another question in the chat that I'll read out loud. It says, it seems like there are terms specific to peers and peer support. Where can people go to learn about the type of training that peers receive and some of the terminology?
It's a great
Okay.
question. So, Kim, again, everything we have is on arpeers.org, including all three manuals. As we've progressed in our profession, we have spent a lot of time updating those manuals. So, from where they started back when I went through the training to now, they are improved. I think that one of the things that we had a hard time with at first, I think, was, we built this concept of a career ladder, but then when we looked at it, we're like, what is the difference between a core level peer and an advanced peer? There was a lot of what I felt like was just a lot of expansion on the core model and the advanced. And so, for me, if I lose sleep over anything, it's I'm always trying to improve the profession. So, I bring in the right people to do that. Like right now, we're in the middle of a peer evaluation, a thorough evaluation. It's probably going to take at least a year to do this. So we can see where we're good and where we're not. You know what I mean? Where do we need to adjust? And so the big conversation is, early on, it was, why are you going through an advanced training?
Mhm.
And I think the professional response would be, well, we want to learn more so we can be a better peer. But if you peeled back another layer, you'd find out that they were on their way to wanting to be a supervisor, and that was just a step in the process. So, we really worked on saying, okay, this is a core peer, and this is the responsibilities of a core peer. But now here's an advanced peer, and this is going to open the door to this, and then the supervisor is going to open the door to this. But all three manuals are on there. All three digital copies are on there. All of our ethics are on there.
Mhm.
Anything, like I said, related to the peer profession, you can find on arpeers.org. We are proud of that website and we keep it updated.
Mm-hmm. We have another question in the chat, which is, what happens if there is an ethical violation? How do you all handle that, and what does the process look like?
Okay, that's another great question. So when we moved to a national credential with NADAC, we did that for several reasons. One, that's this, one of the two largest credentialing bodies, in the nation, and we knew that their policy and procedures and everything was already dialed in. So when we contracted with them, part of their scope was to form what is known, and this information is also on arpeers.org, is the Arkansas Peer Ethics Board. So if there's a violation on there, if someone needs to file a violation, they will go to arpeers.org and they'll find the ethical complaint form, and they will fill out the ethical complaint form. There's instructions on, how to fill out file the violation, and
Mhm.
then it is sent to our certification body. And then our certification manager, Michael Little, sends that over to the Arkansas Peer Ethics Board, and then they meet as a group. to review, and then there's time frames on when they have to, respond to the responded in the complainant to say this is what's happening, allow them time to gather information, to dispute it, or a lot of the times what we see is a self-report. There's also a self-report form. So say for instance, my grandma passes away and I had a reservation that I wasn't aware of, and it triggered me to want to go have a drink. Um, that is also right under keeping your personal recovery first. It says you will maintain abstinence while being a peer specialist. And so I might have called my supervisor, and they said, okay, we talk about, am I safe? Well, whatever the situation is, whatever the conversation goes, the supervisor is going to say, well, you have the opportunity where you could self-report. And that's what I would suggest to saying, I know, I realize I made a mistake here. I want to go ahead and get in front of this, and I'm going to self-report on myself. Um, and so there's two ways you can file that. Kim, you could file an ethical violation against somebody. Another peer could file an ethical violation against somebody, or you can self-report. And it also is in our ethics that says if you are aware of an ethical violation and you don't report it, then you can be found guilty as well. And Kim, it makes sense. It makes sense. We knew with the stigma that comes with our profession, with somewhere in the 80 percentile people being justice involved, that the only way we would get into the doors that we needed to be in was to have a strong set of ethics. And I'm going to tell you, of everything that we do in our manual, I am the one that usually goes over there and presents the ethics, because I want to present it in light that says we're going to have to follow these ethics, because if we don't, this profession will fail. So we are strong on ethics. Obviously, we have 3 sets.
That's phenomenal and amazing, and what a very rigorous process. One of the questions I have is, how do we get that information out to potentially the general community or an employer who may not be aware of this process?
Like I said, I feel like communication is paramount to what we do. I would love it when people are thinking about hiring a peer, they got questions, if they would just reach out to us so we could set up a Zoom or even an in-person meeting and cover this information. You couldn't ask us enough questions. We want to answer every question to make people feel comfortable, as well as prepared to take on a peer. And we get this a lot. I have, over at AORP, I have Kurt calls me a lot and says, hey, I'm funding this police peer partnership. They're looking for a peer. It's usually in a very rural area. And so, what happens a lot of time, Kim, is they start thinking, well, we want to hire somebody that's from our area. So they start looking for somebody that maybe they've arrested a few times that they've heard's doing good, and then they put them through the training. And that's what we were talking about earlier. So, you come out, it's been described as drinking out of a fire hose, that term people use when you go through the core training. So they come out, they're overwhelmed. And then they have this investigator that's never worked with a peer.
And they're out in the middle of nowhere by themselves.
Right. So there's probably not a peer supervisor directly in that area. We're working on that as well. And then they tell them, go out and conquer, and so they just get off to a bad start. And that's when you start to see a lot of co-opting and peer drift and burnout. It happens very early on because they're just not aware of what to do. So now I try to meet with those people and prepare them just like what we're talking about. Prepare them, and then encourage that peer. Our ethics was something that we took on with our national ethics that I thought was fantastic. Our ethics, the Arkansas ethics, are more comprehensive than the national ethics. I say if you follow our ethics, you don't have to worry about those at all. But one of the things they had in there, and it was one of the things that I've seen most often, is people do not stay in supervision. They would go out and they would get the supervision hours to be ready to test. They would test, and then you have to do 20 hours on a core level over the next 2 years. So they would just ghost for 8 months. And this new ethic says that you have to be in at least 2 supervisions a month, and that helps people stay engaged. Because if you take an 8, 6, 5, 4-month gap, 2-month gap out of supervision, you're going to come there and you're not going to know what's going on because so much information is covered in there. And plus, it helps you stay connected, especially when you're in, one of the rural areas, which makes up like 73% of Arkansas. You want to stay in supervision and stay connected.
Absolutely. And it looks like we have another question in the chat. Jessica, please put your question in the chat or come off mute.
Hi, yeah, I just was wondering if you had any pointers for because I'm a peer specialist for Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield in the Northeast Arkansas region, and I feel like I've just struggled to balance the peer world and the corporate world. I was just wondering if there's any tips to make that a smoother. I don't know. I feel like
You know,
they're separate entities and very unique entities all together, and then you kind of marry it to together.
You.
yeah, Jessica, I definitely know where you're coming from. I was really excited to see the amount of peers that Blue Cross and Blue Shield has hired. But I think that the best advice I could give you, Jessica, would be to reach out to Tawana Greenlaw, who is a peer supervisor that works with Blue Cross and that probably has a very good understanding of what you're talking about, and that could probably work you through these pretty easily. Have you had that conversation
Yeah,
with your,
yeah.
is,
She's my supervisor too.
have,
I
have
just
you had that conversation with her?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've taken all the corrective action she's suggested and everything. I don't know. I just feel like in other jobs or I don't know. I just always feel like I could master things, but this one's very challenge like it has challenges throughout it, but you know, I don't feel like I've mastered it.
Well, I'll tell
I
you
feel
what,
like
Jessica,
it's a constant learning thing.
I understand. I would be happy to meet with you and Tawana in a Zoom outside of here and maybe work through some of these challenges.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
you bet.
That's so gracious of you. Thank you, Casey. Looks like we had another hand up. Um,
Yes,
and
can you hear me?
yes, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. This is Mylan here. And my question is more so I know that with the peer, it's heavy on the recovery. But me working in the mental health field, and we've done experienced a few peer support specialists that kind of struggle with the mental health aspect of it, where they're more kind of focused on the recovery aspect of it. And I was just
Mhm.
trying to see if there any way to for us as employers to be able to blend that better or communicate that better as far as the mental health expectations.
Mhm. And I was waiting for this question. I figured this question would come up. And so, like for most of us, I think I heard the number 50%, of people that have substance abuse have an underlying mental health condition. But then I've heard it as high as 80%, and I'm going to say it's somewhere in between there. I'm considered a co-occurring, so I have Amanda too. So, but I agree with you because when we're doing the training, so the training, if you see a lot of most of the scenarios, as a matter of fact, are geared toward the mental health side of it. And we actually went in and made some scenarios that have some substance abuse tied to it. But you have so many people that identify so much with the substance abuse side that it's difficult for people because the eligibility requirements say you have to have mental health, direct lived experience with mental health or substance use disorders or be co-occurring. So we acknowledged this working with Bridget a while back, and we are in the process of working directly on a specialty track for the mental health field.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be very beneficial. Because
Yes,
you just
sir.
want to make sure we communicating where, because you can see the confusion sometimes or the frustration coming from the peer. We want to make sure we able to
Yeah.
articulate, specifically what's needed because we want to make sure it's clear, in order to help everybody stay on track, stay focused, and stay structured.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
but what a lot of peers don't understand is while going through training, and just because there is so much experience in the room a lot of the time with substance use instead of mental health and not both, is that those evidence-based practices taught in training do apply to both.
Oh,
They're
yes.
scenario focused, right? So we're talking about problem impact, you know what I mean? PICBA, we're talking about trauma informed care. That all applies to basically any area of life, but also substance abuse and mental health.
That's so helpful. We are right at 9. One of the things that I just wanted to mention and give a shout out is we work on several different federal projects that are related to substance misuse. And I have to say, Arkansas's peer program is just nationally recognized when I'm in groups and talking to people and listening. Some people don't even have peer recovery support specialist programs. And when we say we're from Arkansas, people automatically are complimentary. They're talking about the great work that's happening here. And so I just want to thank you both for sharing about this great work, talking about how can we incorporate the peer into the team-based care, talking about how to get employers to be more aware, and talking about the amazing training that you're doing, this year-long survey to try to improve and make things better. We can't thank you enough for all the work that you are doing. And thanks for being on with us. And hope our audience has a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see everyone back in the new year.
Thank you so much.
Take care.